Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Today is the day we do Mythbusters. Co-host today is Chris Rossini, and he is also our editor of the RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Chris, good to have you with us today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. Great to be back with you again.
Good. Do you think we can figure out a few things to talk about that people are misled on in the general public, both economically and politically? Or do we have to say everybody is fully informed and we have no responsibility to try to straighten things out?
Fortunately, we always have that responsibility. There's never a shortage of myths. So we'll start today with the concept of, or the topic of eminent domain. And most recently it was discussed in a Republican debate, and Donald Trump is gangbusters for eminent domain. He thinks it's so necessary. Otherwise, how would we all have those pothole-ridden roads that government blesses us with? And he got into a confrontation with Jeb Bush, who accused Trump of using it for private benefit, and it shouldn't be used. In any case, they're all missing the point on why eminent domain is such a bad thing. And so we'll let you, Dr. Paul, cover the topic in depth so that people can have a good understanding.
Well, good. There is a lot of confusion out there about eminent domain. There is a provision in the Constitution that says the government has the right to take property as long as they pay for it for public use. Of course, most people back then, even now, understand that public use means that they're going to use it, to build an air base or something along these lines. And maybe they inferred about having highways, but they weren't even given explicit authority to build the roads in the Constitution. But it was very, very narrow. It wasn't thought that it could be used for commercial reasons. And this is what Trump believes, and a lot of business people believe this. Even Walmart believes this. They say, well, we're going to improve your community. We're going to take this land that's hardly paying any taxes because there's a bunch of old houses on it, even though the people are quite pleased with their own property. And we're going to turn it into a big business, and you can charge us more taxes, so therefore it's a public use, and everybody benefits. The businessman benefits. He comes in, he pays higher taxes. The only people that suffer happen to be the property owners. And of course, in a free society, property is very, very important, and it should never be taken carelessly. But what they put in the Constitution was rather a reflection of what was known. Eminent domain is not brand new with our Constitution. It's too bad they didn't tighten up on it rather than allow it to be loosely written where now it's abused. But the way it's written in the Constitution, the way the Constitution is written, is it doesn't restrain the states. The states can still be abusive under the Constitution because the Constitution was written to restrain the federal government to take it in for federal government use, because there was always an assumption that if you have a government, you have to have some property to manage the government, but not quite the way it is today. Most people, like Trump, believe that there's no progress without eminent domain, and that you don't see the businessman benefiting and bringing in jobs and this sort of thing. But it reminds me of the story of James Hill, who built the Great Northern Railroad in the late 1890s. The interesting thing there is he didn't believe in government subsidies and government land grants. He could have participated because all the big railroads did. They took free land, and they're still managing in some way this free land that the government gave them, a huge subsidy. He didn't want to participate in it. The interesting thing is Hill did not want to do this. He built one of the biggest and the best and the only one that didn't go bankrupt. So he refused the subsidies and refused the bureaucracy, and it worked out much better. But it was hard for most people to turn it down. But it's interesting in that debate, Trump argues his case. You have to give him credit. He was good on sticking to his principles, although they were wrong, that eminent domain, use it anytime you want it and need it, and just pay them. Of course, he says they'll always get a good price, which is not true, because if you've lived in a house and your family's had it for 150 years, how do you even know what the price is? But Bush comes back and he's pretty good too. He says, he challenged Trump. Well, you're just doing it for big business. You're an evil, selfish person. You take land from poor people. But Trump comes back and he's pretty good on this. He says, yes, we know about eminent domain. Do you believe in eminent domain for the Keystone Pipeline? Of course, the answer was that, Bush says, that is private. That isn't private. That's government. That's public use. Is this privately built pipeline? And this is one of the reasons the pipeline gets very complex in getting permission. In the old days, we used to be able to build these railroads and all between some minor agreement between states and Canada and things. It wasn't a big deal. Today, you can move along, although there are hundreds of pipelines crossing states and government and between the two countries. Today, the situation is where the president can just close down these pipelines and declare that it can't work. So Trump's answer is have eminent domain. And Bush is also weak because he'd have a tough time defending his brother who used eminent domain to build the Arlington baseball stadium. They took land from people, and it was good for the community. So it is a conflict. In a free society, property should be privately owned, and everything conceivable should be there to protect this property, and shouldn't be emotional. It shouldn't be even dollar denominated. It should be what the ownership shows. This is one reason why America became a much richer and prosperous country, is because it did recognize private property, and this was recognized all the way back to the founding of the country. And yet, eminent domain now, if Trump has his way, eminent domain will be, accepted. Today it's controversial and we take it to court, but with a Trump who's emphatic, I'm afraid he would institutionalize it and increase it. And who knows, with the conditions in this country and around the world, and now that Obama and the presidents are getting authority to even use troops for martial law in this country, who knows what eminent domain may mean on this. But I think it's a great issue, important issue. But if anything, we should move in the other direction, making it more difficult for governments to take any private land ever. It should not be used carelessly as it is today. So to me, it was an interesting discussion. I don't think they touched on it. I don't think they have the solution in their casual conversation, because they both had a weak position. I would like to see ownership of land, the principle, strengthened, not weakened.
Yes, next, Dr. Paul, let's move on to some very funny irony. We have Bernie Sanders, who rails against money in politics, big money in politics and influence. And yet, in addition to the many millions that he's raised, just since New Hampshire, he raised another $7.1 million. Now, that seems to me that there are some people that like the idea that Bernie Sanders is going to reach into pockets and shower them with gifts. So they see a benefit to themselves and they'd like to influence that outcome. And they're doing so by donating money to Bernie Sanders. So will Bernie Sanders return that money to his donors?
No, but you bring up a really interesting point, because most people would give Sanders a pass. No, he's getting it from poor people, and they're middle class, and they're giving him $35, $50. And that's so different than a big businessman. But it really isn't. The welfare mentality, the entitlement system, the transfer of wealth, which we live with today because we don't have a free society and a free market and sound money. So both Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, endorse this principle of entitlement and transfer of wealth. So there's, corporate welfare. We know about that, and Sanders is against it. I used to work with Sanders when he would be against corporate welfare. But the principle is identical when you take money. Governments give money for certain things to the average person in the middle class. Free school, free education, everything is free. But he never says where it comes. Oh, it comes from the government. well, the government never produces anything, so where does the government get it? Well, they can borrow it, yeah, but somebody finally has to pay for it. Or they can print the money, yeah, and somebody has to pay for the inflation. The very people they're trying to help. Or they can play the role of envy and try to penalize those individuals who think they have more than they should and unfairly so, and that is that just raise the taxes on the rich. But what people don't want to admit is that in a pure democracy, one of the most powerful special interests is the majority, because they can dictate and say, I'm entitled to this, I have a right to it, and I want you to take care of me. And what it does, there is not as much conflict there as it might seem, that the poor want giveaways and the wealthy want handouts too. They actually work together in Washington. They cooperate because in combination, they endorse the principle of welfareism. So I don't think the conflict is nearly as it seems not to be. Like the poor and the wealthy get along together so as long as they endorse this principle of welfareism. But it'll be politicized, and they play these political games. And I think, quite frankly, a socialist and somebody who claim they're going to give free things to almost everybody, they have the upper hand because they have more numbers. But the coalition will keep coming together. Before I went to Congress, I always thought, well, the welfare system is just rotten. Everybody's getting something for free, and that's why people don't work. But since I've been to Washington and spent some time there, I've concluded that the big welfare benefits go to the rich, but you cannot ignore this, and Sanders shouldn't get away with the inconsistency of saying, yes, we're going to regulate money, except if money that comes to me, then we don't need to regulate it.
Right. And we'll stay on the topic of entitlements, and we're going to cover the myth that government is there to take care of us in retirement. And this is a myth that's unfortunately going to hit a lot of people hard, and it is hitting a lot of people hard. The percentage of 55 and older has exploded in the workforce. And one thing that former Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan said, and it was actually kind of true, he said, you'll get your money, you'll get your Social Security checks, the Fed will print up the money. What that money will be able to buy is another thing. So, Dr. Paul, please talk about this myth that government is there to take care of you in retirement.
Well, it gets a lot of votes until the government goes broke. And now our government, our country is broke. And I think the actual acknowledgement of that has occurred in steps. But probably the last step of the acknowledgement was the financial bust in the year 2000. And now the elderly are having trouble. They say, the government tells us there's no inflation. But why would the elderly have to be compelled to work later than ever before, and their standard of living goes down and the Social Security checks don't pay the bills? Well, it's because they don't have enough money at the end of the month. But there's no inflation, they claim. Yes, the standard of living is down. The figures are fudged. They don't tell us the truth about inflation. And this idea that Social Security would protect us is something else, or even our own pension funds. You know, there's so much abuse and corruption in the management of the funds that they think the only solution to that are more regulations and more regulations. Well, the regulations don't work. And the regulation of the decreasing standard of living doesn't work. And then when you look at the chart there with the number of people going up, you know what it does? It contradicts the chart that shows that the labor participation rate is actually going down. So this means that the participation rate of anybody under 55, especially the people in the 20s and the 30s and early 40s, that goes way down. And because this one is going up. But this is a representation of that that the elderly are not feeling comfortable and they're going to have to work into a later time. But it is now the acknowledgement that there's something very, very seriously wrong. And you can talk all about taking care of people, and yes, we'll raise the benefits and all, but there's a dead end to this because the creation of wealth by creating new money doesn't work. And eventually it destroys productivity, is where we are, and I think these last 15 years productivity has gradually decreased. Well, then they say, well, there's deflation. not in the true sense of the word. The money supply keeps going up. What's frustrating to the planners is that the money doesn't go into building industries because of the conditions and the debt and all these things. So, but where does it go? It goes into buying up debt. So there's a lot of money. I mean, we can spend money overseas, but they accommodate by buying our debt. So yes, there's an explosion of debt in all sections of the economy, government and private. And that is where the real problem is, but it's this basic belief that they can take care of it. But I think the elderly, those people on fixed incomes, what about this whole idea of the elderly being punished by low interest rates for their savings? So it's totally opposite of people working hard and saving money. You get penalized. And now what are they talking about? They're talking about negative interest rates. So why wouldn't the people be worried? This is just starting, and we haven't even done it to ourselves yet, but they're hinting that they might, and other countries are doing this. It's absolutely insane to think that charging you money to put money in the bank is going to help and cause people to spend money. They're more likely to take their money out and put it in a shoebox because it'll at least have the same nominal value. The government wouldn't take a tax, or the banks wouldn't take a tax for keeping the money there. So it is a mess. They're always compensating, propping up a bad system. They won't admit the problem, and the elderly are suffering, and it's going to continue to suffer. And unfortunately, eventually it hits everybody. And the only thing that can solve this, of course, is reassessing the free market system and sound money and private property rights and all the things that are necessary to cause prosperity. But right now, I believe the downturn, significant downturn, occurred at the turn of the century in the year 2000, and since then it's gotten worse, and now we're seeing the consequence of the elderly suffering probably slightly more than others. But just think of the very young now, who so many of them are still required to live at home to try to survive. But the answers are out there. We shouldn't be too discouraged that there's no answer to this. Well, there is an answer to it if people in this country could hear the message and accept the principles of liberty and sound economic policy.
Yes, and Dr. Paul, let's finish with the root of the problem, the big issue, and that is the monetary system. One of my fondest memories when you were still in Congress was when you used to question then Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke. It was always exciting. It was on CNBC, and they're actually all still on YouTube for those who are interested in watching them. But one of the finest moments was when you flat out asked Bernanke, "Do you think that gold is money?" And he was stunned and waited a few seconds, and then finally answered no. And said that central banks just hold gold out of tradition. So since gold went up strongly this week, let's revisit its role as money and the myth that it is not money.
Well, this is an important question, obviously, because it has significance on every monetary transaction, not only within our country, but within around the world, because it is the principal currency of the world, the reserve currency of the world. And to me, the fact that if you don't have a definition of money, we have no definition of our dollar. You can sit down and look throughout our history and have maybe 10 different definitions of the dollar, whether it's a silver dollar or a gold dollar, a paper Federal Reserve dollar, and all kinds of things. So I liken it to what would happen if you had a construction site. What if Donald Trump had to build a building and everybody used different measuring rods? The guy that did the foundation, the guy that hammered the nails, and the guy that did electricity, all had a measuring rod that was different and was changing every day. That you didn't have a yardstick, you didn't have inches or meters to measure things by. I mean, that building would be so shaky that it wouldn't stand. It would eventually get just knocked down. And that is what's happened. We've built an entire economy for decades now, especially since 1971, of a fluctuating currency and no definition. All is malinvestment and debt. And every time a crisis seems to appear to want to make the corrections, well, the politicians, by spending more money, and the Federal Reserve prints more money, thinking this is the solution, that wealth can come out of a printing press. And it cannot do that. All you can do is buy more debt for this, and you're hammering nails in a building that is so fragile that it's going to come down. And they're only anticipating now when that's going to come, because more and more people know about this. But you know, this didn't occur immediately, and it didn't occur because I decided to talk about the gold standard. I had really nothing to do with this, because all you have to do is look at history. As long as there's been recorded history, gold was very valuable and sought after by the average person and by governments because it was so significant. The first coins that were minted was 700 years BC by Lydia, even though 1,000 years before that they still knew about gold, but they made coins 700 BC. And all of a sudden, we have a Federal Reserve Board chairman who actually has convinced himself. I don't think he's sort of knows that we're telling the truth. He doesn't want it to be the truth, because most of these guys have spent a lifetime trying to prove Keynesian economics and central banking, that it is the salvation, even though, yes, we can get some benefits along the way, but it's the salvation for a sound economic system. So they have a lot at stake philosophically and emotionally, but the truth is that the market declares what is money. And right now, we're moving into this. I'm fascinated with what's been happening the last couple of days. Even in the last month, there's been a resurgence in the interest of gold. There's a currency war going on throughout the world. People want to devalue and think they can get a trading edge. So, but gold has gone up $150 in the last month. This is a tremendous move toward gold. This did not happen in 08 and 09 when everything crashed down and prices went down, the market went down, and commodities went down. Gold went down too. But this time, the worse the market gets, it seems like the more people are saying, hey, you know what we have to do? We have to resort to real money. So we have to recognize first that governments cannot, by fiat, declare and say gold is money. Money ultimately has to be endorsed by the society and the people, and paper is not money. Paper will only work with money because one tool they have, it was once linked to gold, so that helps. But the other thing is, there's a law that says it, and that is legal tender laws, that you can't do anything else other than use paper money. Which totally contradicts the Constitution, because the Constitution is very clear. You can't use anything other than gold and silver as legal tender. Why don't they have the honesty to repeal that? Why does Bernanke and the others, when I'd ask them, well, if you don't like gold and gold is not money, why don't you just get rid of the gold? And that would be a true test. But what is happening now, and we did get rid of a lot of gold, and the West has gotten rid of a lot of gold, but now central banks overall are buying gold, but it's mostly in the Far East. China and India and other places, and Russia, I'm sure, is accumulating more gold. So no, and that'll be the market will determine that. For money to really exist, it has to originate in the market, and the people have to endorse that principle. And if you were starting a new society and a new economy, you couldn't just say, well, here, let's have 12 people go in there and agree on printing pieces of paper, and we'll accept it as money. It would be so outrageous. And yet that's where we are, and we still trust it. But the trust is disappearing, so it's so crucial that we get the American people and get the people who are going to be moving into strategic and important periods in developing policy, that they understand the importance of money, understand its history, and that just because Bernanke and Greenspan decides that, you know, gold is not money and Federal Reserve notes are, that is a big fallacy that needs refuted. I want to thank everybody, and thank you too, Chris, for being with us today.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Dr. Paul.
Great, and I want to thank the audience for tuning in today to Mythbusters, and please come back to the Liberty Report soon.